Is the Denon PMA-900HNE a new integrated amplifier with a bit of old-school hi-fi charm, or is it really an older design that has been given some modern features for 2022? Let's find out. The PMA-900HNE is Denon's most affordable, network-enabled streaming integrated amplifier. With 50 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 85 watts into 4, the 900 has virtually everything a modern hi-fi enthusiast needs: a built-in DAC, phono preamp, subwoofer out, network and wireless connectivity, as well as support for services like Alexa and Google Assistant. In addition to Bluetooth and AirPlay, you can also use HEOS, which opens up additional services like Spotify Connect. While the mere mention of HEOS is enough to cause some audiophiles to foam at the mouth, it's not that bad. HEOS is no Blue OS, but it's better than nothing if you're a streaming-first music enthusiast. And the inclusion of HEOS means you can also more easily integrate the 900 into a whole home audio system built around other Denon and Marantz products. But you can also adjust the amp's tone controls, balance, and source direct mode, which is a nice plus. Of course, you can also make similar adjustments using the included remote. And while there are physical tone controls and buttons for various features like Source Direct, all rely on the Denon's large display window. All of the amp's physical controls turn endlessly with no hard starts or stops. Instead, a graphic on the amp's display indicates each control's position. The display is nice. It is readable from about 6 feet or so when shuffling through the Denon's deeper menus, and it is completely readable from 10 or more feet away when just eyeing volume. The design of the 900 isn't anything new. Visually, the 900 looks a lot like other Denon integrated amplifiers, some of which are going back decades. I'm not saying the Denon looks old or is ugly, just that Denon has a look. While the 900 may have a fancy new display, it's not enough of a change for me. But from a construction standpoint, it's a pretty solid amplifier. Setting up the Denon was very straightforward. I connected it to our Sony X95K using an optical cable, which, along with HEOS, allowed me to stream music from our Apple TV 4K. To test the phono preamp, I used the Project Debut Carbon Evo with its stock cartridge. As for speakers, I primarily listened to 3 different speakers: our Revel M16s, the Arendal 1961s, and the Project Speakerbox 5S2, which were by far my favorite. And for fun, I even tested the Denon with the Bowers & Wilkins 805D4s, but more on that in a minute. Regardless of the speakers, the sound was 2 things: clear and recessed. Now, don't mistake recessed for warm, because I'm actually talking about the physical placement of the sound, which is just set further back when compared to other amplifiers, and that has an effect on the Denon's tonality. You see, a good amp should do little more than amplify the signal fed to it. In other words, it will have no sound of its own regardless of its design or class. But the Denon isn't a strict amp. It's an integrated, one that also has a built-in preamp, DACs, and so on, all of which introduce the possibility of coloration or character to the sound. This means that the 900's recessed quality may not be the fault of the internal amp, but rather the various pieces interacting with one another that creates this sensation. And it is a sensation, one that is audible when directly comparing the Denon to other amps, such as our AUDIOLAB 6000A Play and the Marantz Model 40N, 2 amps with similar power ratings to that of the Denon. Compared to those 2 amplifiers, the Denon seems laid back, polite, or softer, especially with respect to its treble performance. I'm not saying the difference is wholly night and day, but when quickly A-Bing the Denon against the AUDIOLAB, everything seemed to take a full step forward through the 6000A Play. This gives the Denon a slightly more easygoing demeanor top to bottom. Bass is deep but comes off a little soft around the edges, lacking in detail that keeps it from being class-leading or perhaps even more competitive. In a lot of ways, the bass through the Denon reminds me of some of our vintage pieces, specifically our Pioneer SX450. Tracks like Honey from Robin or Sentient from Enema both had the depth I have come to expect, but neither hit with the same speed or texture that I know exists in the recording. As for the mid-range, I think this is where listeners are going to fall most in love with the Denon because it is smooth, smooth, smooth. There is a slight sense of warmth present here, but like with the bass, I've heard greater, more readily apparent detail throughout the mid-range from amps not named Denon. I've also heard greater inflection from singers like David Gray or even Chris Cornell. Speaking of Cornell, Audioslave is one of my torture tests for amplifiers, as few manage to always be listenable and non-grating, especially at high volumes, but the Denon is an exception. And while Cornell may have sat center of the stage, he was not front and center because the 900's entire presentation is just never in your face. Which brings me to the amp's more polite treble performance. I say this because when using the Denon to listen to the Bowers & Wilkins 805D4s, which admittedly no one is going to do, the B&W sounded less forward up top. I know the 805D4s do not roll off when it comes to their treble response, and so you could easily classify them as bright. And yet, when connected to the Denon, they gave up some of that edge. Measuring the B&Ws using 3 different amplifiers, the AUDIOLAB, the Marantz, and Denon, revealed that from about 5 kilohertz on up, the Denon rolls off the highs by about 0.5 to 1.5 dB in spots, even with all of its tone controls defeated or in source direct mode. If you're struggling with brighter speakers, maybe, just maybe, the Denon could help. I can't say why the Denon measures differently up top, but with everything else in the system and my measurement setup remaining the same, the Denon simply produced a slightly different response time and time again. And all of this comes together in a soundstage that is broad, easily extending beyond the boundaries of your speakers and possessing perhaps above average depth due to the amp's less forward nature. But it's a soundstage that is by no means sharp. Again, the Denon is giving me old school amplifier vibes. But switch to another amp, even one close to the Denon in price, and the difference in focus and presence was immediately apparent. The 900's dynamics were a little subdued, less agile or snappy in comparison. Turning things up did bring about positive change in this arena, but on the whole, the Denon is simply a smoother, more seductive operator than it is a fighter. So, as long as the Denon's overall sound quality is one that speaks to you, there isn't much about its day-to-day performance that I feel you need to be outright concerned about. The Denon's DAC, especially when connected to a smart TV, is a welcome addition, and it can even be configured to operate somewhat like an HDMI connection with respect to powering on and off the unit itself, which is very nice. Like many of you, I'm not the biggest fan of Hios, but it always worked and sounded fine. The 2 quirks worth mentioning: first, the 900 can drive 2 sets of stereo speakers, only Denon puts the A terminals below the B terminals, which I don't think anyone else in hi-fi does. It's a head scratcher for sure, but nothing that's going to affect your overall experience. And number 2, sometimes there is an input lag between the remote and the Denon itself. It doesn't happen every single time, but it does happen. That's really it for me when it comes to downsides. As for comparisons, we are going with the Cambridge Audio AXR 100, the AUDIOLAB 6000A Play, BLUESOUND's Powernode, and the NAD C338. For me, the Denon is most like the Cambridge in terms of its sound. It possesses just a hint of old school charm that mates well with a wide range of electronics and music. Like the Cambridge, the Denon is a good all-rounder, but not class-leading, which makes it an option, but by no means will every listener like or love it. As for the AUDIOLAB, I still think it's the better amp. It has a firmer grip on bass and is more focused and detailed top to bottom. Yes, the 6000A Play is going to cost you more, but I believe the added investment is 100% worth it. When it comes to the NAD C338 and BLUESOUND's Powernode, the Denon has more character, but for me personally, I would not say that character is for the better. Personal taste aside, both the Powernode and the C338 are superior products. Both possess a more neutral and accurate sound. The Powernode is practically unbeatable at its price, and when you consider that it gives you BlueOS and HDMI for less than what the Denon commands, it's a no-brainer why I continue to recommend it. The Denon PMA-900HNE is a good integrated amplifier, one that I could see budding enthusiasts and seasoned audiophiles being pretty pleased with because it's a modern product that possesses a bit of charm or old school-like character. While it is fairly competitive in terms of features and price, it's not a game-changing one. I enjoyed my time with it, especially when paired with more forward or treble-leaning speakers, but that isn't to say that everyone with bright speakers should buy this amp or that you're automatically going to be happy with it. Like with anything, I would just urge you to audition it alongside similar integrateds to make sure it's the right amplifier for you. So that's it. That is now my take on the Denon. But before we go, what did you think of it?
Well, it looks like I'm playing the role of bad cop today.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, you may not think the 900 looks old or ugly, but I do.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, if you told me you'd pulled this out of a bin at Goodwill, I would have believed you.
Wow. Wow. I will admit, I mean, it does look like some of Denon's older stuff when I was, coming up, but I mean, I don't think it looks bad.
Maybe it's just me, but for me, I think an integrated amp should have a little bit more visual interest. Home theater receivers, fine, you're probably going to hide those away, but and I can accept that those are going to be on the boring side.
Sure.
But if I'm going to be forced to look at something, which I think a lot of people that are going to use an integrated, they're probably going to have it out, so that you can really see it. I want it to look nice.
Okay. Wow.
And while I will agree with you that I don't think the Denon sounds bad per se, it's just, personally, it's just not a sound that's for me. I would take any of the amps that you mentioned over this one.
Okay.
I know that you mentioned the Cambridge AXR100, which I'm a big fan of, as far as being the most, the closest to sound.
Closest, yeah.
Now, for me, I think that if we're talking Cambridge audio, that the more similar sound to me is the CXA line.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which
is a step up from the...
I do know, but it's also a different type of amplifier. I'm pretty sure.
A little bit different. I mean, but...
I've never been a fan of the CXA line or the Edge, as pretty as I think that their products are.
Yeah.
From Cambridge, the AXR100 is more in line with like what I want an amp to sound like.
Well, you know what you just did there?
What?
You just made the Denon 900's value proposition, because if I'm not mistaken, the cheapest CXA, if you're saying they're comparable...
In terms of sound.
In terms of sound, if you're saying they're comparable in terms...
there's no comparison.
Oh, visually, I think Cambridge...
kicks it.
Yeah. But the CXA line, I want to say, is probably $500, if not $800 more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, if you're into that kind of sound, I think that you can get a sort of discounted version of the Cambridge CXA 81. To me, they sound similar. But I still think Cambridge is heads and shoulders like better visually. Now,
and the build quality too.
I think the build quality, I just went and looked at the Denon again one more time before we sat down to do this, and the dials and stuff are nice. They're, like it feels like it's built pretty well.
Yeah.
I just think if you step back, it looks cheap.
Okay, that's fair. I'll buy that.
And the little display window, again, like, just freaking don't give me one. Like,
come on now. That display is way nicer than like the graphing calculator displays that we've had to put up with Rotel on $3,000 pieces. So
there is zero excuse. Rotel is, I'm sorry, you're
great amp,
you're just cheaping out.
Yeah.
You're doing it to save a dime.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's at this point, you have zero excuses.
Right.
Now, is this a better display? Yes, but I still don't think I just don't think it's as nice as what I think you can get in today's day and age. And I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Now, if we're just looking at this from a price perspective,
okay.
I think that definitely the BLUESOUND Powernode is the same price.
Okay.
And I would absolutely, like you, pick it because I get HDMI.
Oh, you get a lot of things.
And it looks like a more modern day piece of equipment.
Yeah, and for people that want to use subwoofers, you get better bass management and all of that stuff that just, while there is a subwoofer out on the Denon, it doesn't have those things. And so, yeah, the BLUESOUND is just a better product.
Yeah, and if you don't quite need the power of the BLUESOUND Powernode, you can get the new Edge that just came out.
Yeah.
And save about $300 if you can get by with about 40 watts. You know. But again, both are far more visually interesting, and the HDMI, and I just prefer the sound of the Powernode products in general. So that would definitely be my pick.
Yeah.
Again, the AXR100 from Cambridge, another no-brainer at $700. Yep, I'm going with it.
Yeah.
My overall pick is still the AUDIOLAB, but at $1,700, I completely understand how that could be just too much of a price jump.
Yeah, I mean, that's
some
for the
people.
Play.
No, I know.
Okay.
I know. So I was just going to say that if you are tighter on your budget, you can get the 6000A, which is around $1,200. So it's like a little bit less than $200 more, which, you know, if you don't need all of the endless streaming features that you get with the Play, the 6000A, I think, would be my just probably overall pick. Like if I could really, really stretch my budget, I would probably go with that. Otherwise, I'm getting the Powernode.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you.
Again, not a bad product. Just,
No.
I think a lot of it comes down to personal taste. And if you like a more like laid back sound, then you'll probably really like the Denon. You know?
Yeah.
It's just, you have to know what kind of listener you are.
So that's it. That is now our review of the Denon PMA-900HNE integrated amplifier. What did you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, my question of the day for you is this. If you were in charge of Denon for the day, what would you have done to improve the 900? Or do you think it's perfect the way that it is? Sound off. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, know that that is a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us thank you very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that is it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on the next video. Bye.